Hey everyone, what's going on? So it has been a long while since I have uploaded on this channel. I just uploaded the first reading of the Diane Downs book that I have been promising for a while, and I'm going to be doing the second part here. Once again, I do apologize for not uploading for a while. I've had a bit of my time occupied by several things and by a certain someone that most of you already know about, but that's not the topic of this video. But yes, the second part of this reading of this book, I think we last left off right before Diane was going to give her accounts of what happened in her point of view the last time around. And on the first reading, for the part one of the reading of this book, I did link all the interviews with Diane Downs, as well as an article explaining, like, her background, her upbringing, and the crime that was committed and stuff, and how she was convicted in 1984, as well as the movie that was actually based off Diane Downs in her case. Yes, there is a movie of based on Diane Downs in her case. The full thing is on YouTube. The quality isn't great, so I would recommend you watch it on a good phone or probably on your laptop. Most likely, if you try to watch it on like a TV, the quality won't be that good at all. So, like I said, it's an old movie. It was like released in '89, and it was a TV movie, but I'd recommend it. It's actually a decent movie. So we'll just get started here. I'm gonna get a drink first. I'm gonna need to get a drink in several moments because I get quite parched when I'm doing these readings. Okay. All right. So the subsection to this one is arrival. Okay. Driving down Old Mohawk Road after these shootings, I had only one thought: get to the hospital fast or my kids were going to die. Yeah, that's why you were reportedly going like, what, 10 miles an hour? Yeah, you were really trying to get to the hospital, Diane. Christy was lying on her side in the back seat, choking on blood that was coming from her gunshot lung. Jesus Christ. Turn over, Christy, turn over, I pleaded. I tried to watch the road and reach back between the bucket seats to turn my daughter over and keep her from suffocating on the blood. And I think I mentioned this interview in the last reading, but it'll be in the videos with the compilation of interviews with Diane Downs. But in one of the interviews, she was describing this exact thing, and when she was describing her daughter, the blood coming out of her daughter's, she literally smiled and looked like she was about to laugh. So, if that isn't an indicator that Diane Downs is guilty, or at the very least very, very seriously fucked up, then I don't know what is. Because you can't tell me that a parent would smile about something like that, or almost laugh about something like that, especially about their kid getting shot. And in one of the cases killed, because there were 3 children, one was killed. Cheryl, and that was the one that was murdered. That died. Cheryl, who was always running around and could never sit still, had used my postal sweater as a blanket and gone to sleep on the carpeted floor in the front. Now she lay curled up in a ball and didn't make a sound. Well, I'm sure she wouldn't. It was so unlike Cheryl. I had never seen her this still. It was so unlike. She's just been fucking shot by you. What would you expect? Not that you'll admit that in this book, but she's just been fucking shot. What do you expect her to do? Or what do you expect her to be like? Oh my god. Cheryl, talk to mommy, Cheryl. Wake up, wake up. I didn't know it, but Cheryl lay dead at my feet, killed instantly by the bullets that had pierced her heart, lung, and spleen. Jesus. You are a fucking bitch. I'm glad you're fucking in prison, that you're gonna be in prison the rest of your fucking life. If there's a fucking hell, I hope you fucking rot in it. I mean, just the way this is... I don't know, just the way this is, like... Whatever. Danny, the baby, and Danny was the son, who was 3 years old when this happened, and he was paralyzed after this. Danny, the baby, was shot in the back and cried steadily and softly all the way to the hospital. It was good to hear the baby crying. It meant he was still alive, but at the same time, I knew he was hurting and afraid, and I wanted to calm him. Go to sleep, Danny, go to sleep, I murmured. The baby will be okay, go to sleep. How odd, urging Cheryl to wake up, to talk, to give some sound of life, and Danny to go to sleep, to cease making the very sounds that let me know he was alive. Yeah, that's, yeah, it's fucking bizarre, man. It's just, speeding along the road, skidding through the tight curves, I tried again and again to reach across and open Cheryl's window. The car was so permeated with the sickening stench of fresh blood that I could barely breathe. I grabbed at my throat again and again, trying to loosen my shirt collar. I knew if I passed out and didn't get to the hospital, none of my kids would survive. I tried to steer with my gunshot left arm and reach across to open the window, but the car ran off the road, nearly hitting a farmer's fence. I don't remember this detail, but time after time I tried to open the window and failed. Finally, steering with my knees, I used my good arm to roll down the window. A blessed wave of fresh air rushed into the car, sweeping away the smell of blood. So you're telling me that while all three of your kids are in the car, shot, one of your daughters just suffered a stroke, the other one's dead, and then your 3-year-old son is in the back crying because he's just been fucking shot. You're worried about the smell of blood in the car and just want to get rid of the smell and get some fresh air. That's what your main concern is right now. When you've got your 3 kids, one of whom is dead, in your car who have been shot and fatally wounded. That's your concern. I mean, I guess, like, the passing out part, okay, but, like, I don't know, I would think that if I was in that type of situation, or if a parent was in that type of situation, passing out would be the very last thing on their minds. Like, they would be awake and alert, especially in this type of situation. By the time I turned onto Hayden Bridge, Christy had stopped choking and only moaned. I reached the intersection, a 3-way stop, and noticed bright lights of a car approaching, and though time was precious, I stopped, not wanting to risk being hit. As the car came to a full stop, I suddenly realized that my arm was cold. I glanced down and saw that it was wrapped with a beach towel, and the towel was soaked in blood. I knew that I must have put the towel on my arm, but I was disturbed that I couldn't recall it. I think that Diane does remember putting the towel around her arm. Like, she's always claimed that she hasn't. Even in her 2010 parole hearing, she claimed that she didn't remember or know how the towel got around her arm, but I think she does remember. I think that if she just says that she remembered and told people that she wrapped a towel around her arm, that it would make her look even worse than she already is, because that would indicate that she was concerned about herself first and her arm rather than her kids, which obviously she was, and she was obviously the one that wrapped the towel around her arm, because her kids couldn't have done it, because all of her kids were shot and fatally wounded, and one of them died. So she could be the only one that did that. Shot herself in the arm to make it look like that, she herself was shot as well, and then go on. And then when I was pulling into the emergency driveway at Mackenzie Williamette Hospital, leaning on my car horn, Cheryl still hadn't moved at all. Christy was moving and moaning, and Danny was still crying weakly. Nurses and a doctor came running out of the hospital, peered into the car, and all they could see was blood. Cheryl was laying in a pool on the floor, and the blood had saturated the sleeves of the heavy sweater she'd used to cover herself. Blood covered the headliner of the car, the seats, and the console, and Christie's long blonde hair was soaked with blood. Jesus Christ. I don't know. I mean, like, just the way it's just written, like, it's written how she talks about it. Like, it's written so coldly and everything. To me, at least, that's just how it's reading. And I don't know. It reminds me of like the Onision books. Remember, like when Gines was reading Stones to Abigail, and Greg like wrote the scene where there was a school shooting, and he went into like like great detail about the blood and everything else, and how it was written and stuff. It reminds me of that. It took a lot of maneuvering by the doctor and nurses to get the children out of the confines of my small car. While one of the nurses took Christy, the doctor grabbed Danny, lifted him up to his shoulder, and carried him into the hospital. I ran behind them thinking they hadn't seen Cheryl. Don't forget Cheryl! Cheryl was pulled from the floor and lifted out of the car, the bloodied sleeves of the sweater swinging erratically, flinging blood everywhere. I burst into the emergency room and shouted to no one in particular, "Call the doctors, call the cops, he's still out there." I was determined to remain with the doctors and nurses carrying my children into the trauma room. I'm sure you were. But a woman kept blocking my way. Every time I turned around, she was right behind me, clipboard in hand, demanding, "Do you have insurance? Do you have insurance?" I abruptly wheeled around, fixed her with a disdainful eye, and asked insolently, "Would you take care of them if we didn't?" The hospital staff was accustomed to dealing with people in stressful situations, saying things they perhaps do not mean, but they had never dealt with anyone like me. Aren't you special? Oh, I'm sure they didn't deal with anyone like Elizabeth Diane Downs before. Oh no. Because you are just a special snowflake, aren't you, Diane? Jesus. Oh man. Like, kids are in the hospital, but you're thinking this. Just, it's very self-centered. This was only the first of countless times I would leave a bad impression on doctors and nurses. I'm sure. Pretty sure doctors and nurses who are in these same type of situations, I'm usually the parents probably usually have more of an emotional reaction to it, and you didn't, as witnessed by all the interviews with you and your parole hearing and everything else. But no, I mean, you're a victim, Diane. You're forever the victim. I followed the doctors as they hurried my children into the trauma room, but they dragged me out and finally forced me to sit. As they probably should in that situation. The receptionist said she was going to call the police, and I nodded my head in silent agreement, then said I wanted to call my parents. The receptionist dialed the Springfield Police Department, mostly out of habit. She reported the shootings to the police, and then I dialed my parents' number. When the telephone rang late Thursday night and my father heard my voice, he knew it was bad news. None of us would ever call Mom and Dad at that time of night. "Please come to the hospital. Don't ask any questions now. Just come," I said. The receptionist left for a moment while I was calling my parents, and when she returned, I was back in the trauma room, pleading with anyone who would listen to tell me how my children were doing, and what was being done for them. I kept saying that the children had lost a lot of blood, and then the nurse ran me out. Someone put a makeshift splint on my arm, and all the while I asked her to find out how my kids were doing. And see, I'm sure that, like, the part about asking how her kids were doing and stuff like that, this concern for her children, I'm sure this was either put in this book and it didn't really happen, or at least it didn't go down that way, or it did happen, but it was all just an act put on Diane to, of course, to make it seem like, that she actually cared about her kids and that, someone else did it. Alright. So, the next part, recollection. When I first went into the trauma room, I could see Danny fighting and crying. There really wasn't much blood except a little on his face. All I could see of Cheryl was her bare feet sticking out. She was always barefoot. There were a whole lot of people around her bed. Yeah. Whenever I went in there, everyone was just standing around Cheryl's bed, but no one was doing anything. Why wasn't anyone doing anything? Probably because they were trying to examine the wound and figure out what to do. Christy's hair was real long, and it was soaked with blood, so I couldn't even see blonde. She was laying on her side, her hand was out in front of her like she was reaching for help, and she was just staring off into space. If I recall correctly, her hand was out in front of her to stop you from shooting her. I could see Christy moving. I knew she was alive and she was struggling. I kept asking anyone who passed by if there was anything I could do, and they just kept telling me to get out. My parents showed up, and Mom came in, and we both stood there crying. Mom kept telling me over and over again that the kids were going to be okay, that they'd make it. I felt utterly useless. I wanted to help, but all I could do was cry. I just couldn't stop crying. Somehow I doubt that you cried very much. Like, I think that that is an exaggeration right here. I 100% believe that this is an exaggeration that she put in to make herself seem better. As far back as I can remember, I was never allowed to cry. When I was in first grade, we got TB tests at school. When I saw the needle, I was terrified and I started crying. The nurse told me to quit crying right now. It was that same year I fell from my scooter and cut my hand so deeply that my dad had to take me to the emergency room to get stitches. I was crying and he tried everything from threats to bribery to get me to stop. Now, this was something Diane did say in her court hearing, I believe. At least in the movie, that's what was said. And I'm assuming that's probably what was said in the court hearing, too. Or in the trial. Not the court hearing, but the trial. And, I mean, that could very well be true. But at the same time, it wouldn't surprise me if Diane would make something like that up to make herself seem like the victim and provide excuses, for herself as to her weird and unusual behavior surrounding this incident. Another time, I was visiting at my grandma's house and I was told to take a shower, and I cried to take a bath instead. My aunt told me that because I cried, I had to take a shower. I was afraid because I had been to a drive-in movie with my aunt and uncle, and in the movie Psycho, a lady gets stabbed in the shower. I remember being with my grandpa when a man came riding up on a horse, and the horse stepped on a baby chick and killed it. I started to cry, and Grandpa told me to quit acting like a baby. And when I was 7, I got the mumps on both sides at the same time. I cried for my mom, but my dad always came. He ended up getting the mumps, and he was very sick. He used to say that if I hadn't whined and cried, he wouldn't have gotten them. Again, like I just said, I mean, this could have happened, this could have very well happened, but at the same time, I'm not sure whether I believe it or not, given who this is. Each time I cried, my dad or mom or some person in a position of authority was there telling me to stop. I came to learn that crying wasn't acceptable, not under any circumstances. Keeping it in was hard because I cried so easily, but the more I kept it in, the easier it became, until finally it became second nature. And I'm guessing that's her explanation, her excuse as to why she showed little to no emotional connection with what happened, other than her talking about herself and laughing and smiling during it and everything. But I feel like even if you were raised that way, if like you're a parent and your kids, what happened to your kids just happened to them, I would imagine that anything like that would just like any learned behavior like that would cease, and you would be an emotional wreck. I mean, that would be my guess. I mean, I'm not a parent, so I guess I can't know. I mean, but that would be my guess, though. Like, if I got shot, or my sister got shot, or whatever, like, my parents wouldn't be trying to hold back their emotions, even if that's what they were taught. I don't know, I find that very, very, very hard to believe. Alright, next section, Richard Cherbono. Richard Cherbono of the Springfield Police Department was the first police officer to respond to the receptionist's call. It was nearly 10:45 when he arrived at the hospital, and after introducing himself to me, Cherbono began the unpleasant but vital task of getting some information from me about where and how the shootings had occurred. I fought to compose myself in order to answer his questions about who had done the shooting. I wanted the man found before he could hurt anyone else. As I answered his questions, I was dying inside, but that had nothing to do with him. His job was to find the man who hurt us. My personal grief had nothing to do with him or anyone else there. My personal grief had nothing to do with him or anyone else there. Well, your kids are there. It's a bit of a slip. I bore my grief inside where I always carried it, and Turbono asked his questions. Turbono knew the rule of thumb well. If a murder suspect isn't apprehended within 24 hours after the crime is committed, chances increase that no one will be caught. But as Turbono went over the details of the shootings with me, even reviewing it a second time, his concern for my emotional state seemed to fade. He would later say that I was extremely composed, considering that my children had been shot as I watched, and that I had been shot in the arm. I believe that. I fully believe that. And it would be weird that you would be composed while you're describing this. Because your kids just got fucking shot and one of them has just died. Any other parent would be an emotional wreck. So I can believe that I would understand why this officer, detective, whatever, would lose sympathy for you, or it would lose concern over your emotional state, because you're showing little to no emotion over this whatsoever. I fully believe that. Together we made a rough sketch of the scene in the car. I showed Charbonneau where I had been standing when the man began firing into the car. I pointed to the drawing, and Charbonneau could see that my hand was shaking. I told Charbonneau about the man demanding my car, and I remarked, well, I wasn't going to let him take my new car. That right there. She was concerned about him taking her new car. That was what came to her mind, and that's what she said. You know, don't hurt my children, don't take my children, don't do anything to them. Just, oh, this car is new, and I don't want you to take it. And said that when I jumped back into the car and drove away, fortunately it's a new car, so it started right up. Wow. Oh, that says it all right there. Charbonneau later said that he couldn't recall anything like this in all his years of police work. Where were the tears, the grief, the anger? He saw me as lighthearted and unconcerned about my kids were lying just yards away in the trauma room fighting for their lives, and I can believe that, and I believe that is a perfect assessment. Again, if any of you haven't watched the interviews with her, I strongly encourage you to go watch those interviews, because this describes it perfectly. And she's going to use the excuse that because of her upbringing, that was why her response was what it was. Even though that's complete bullshit. This isn't just some cut on your hand or some injury or something. This is your fucking kids. I'm not gonna fucking buy that, Diane. I don't know why I'm talking to her, because I'm sure that she's never gonna see this, but still, like, it's like, I'm not gonna fucking buy that. That's bogus. How could he have known enough about me to understand why I acted the way I did? You fucking bitch. You're the victim. Again, you're the victim. You know, in your narcissistic, sociopathic mind, you would be the victim. In truth, I was nearly overwhelmed by everything that had happened and by everything going on around me. I began keeping a diary after the shootings occurred, and, although the judge would never let the jurors see it, my diary recorded how I felt. Nurse there to take blood. I hate needles. I've seen enough blood. Cops want me to get out to the scene. I'm on that part. I've seen enough blood. Again, like, whatever. Cops want me to go out to the scene. Nurse says take me to Sacred Heart. They won't be responsible. Nurse says I could die. Cop says they need to find the man. Help me decide. I can't take it anymore. Help. I'll go. Because maybe I can help. But if I die, someone needs to sue the cops, because I won't be there to take care of my kids. The cops are doing their job. They need to see where the event happened in order to proceed with what they're going to do, to find the man and to get evidence and stuff. They're doing their job. Alright, let's see. trying to get an idea here. I'm going for about 24 minutes. We'll go a little further. We'll go a little further here. Alright, this next section, Robin Rutherford. Alright, give me a second here. Gotta get another drink here. Alright. Okay. Sergeant Robin Rutherford of the Lane County Sheriff's Department got to the hospital 20 minutes later, and Charbonneau filled him in on the conversation he'd had with me and Rutherford. Seemed to think that I was hiding something. I could see why. Rutherford met me and my father and saw I was being treated for a gunshot wound to my left arm. A Springfield officer who had arrived at the hospital quietly told Rutherford that my injury wasn't serious. Rutherford began to question me, but was interrupted again and again by doctors and nurses treating my arm. As we talked, a nurse walked by carrying a tray loaded with vials of blood. I smiled broadly, laughed, and said, "There's the vampire lady." What the fuck? What the fuck? This is supposed to be a defense? This is just making you look worse. Oh my god, your kids are like in the same freaking building, possibly going to die, and you're being all lighthearted and making jokes. Again, I don't give a shit. Like, you can make all the excuses you want about your upbringing, whatever. But in this instance, no, I don't believe that would happen. With any other parent, I don't believe that they would be doing that. I just don't. I don't. Not, especially after it's just happened. At first, Rutherford wasn't sure he'd heard that right, but yes, that's what I'd said. It was my way of avoiding the horrid reality before me. Rutherford wanted to take me back to the scene to establish the exact location where the shootings happened, but I became uncooperative and declared that I wouldn't answer any more questions until I found out how my kids were doing. My father had infinitely more control over me than anyone, so in front of him, Rutherford told me he wanted to take me to the scene of the shootings. My father had his hands on my shoulders. He was controlling me as he had all his life. "She'll go with you," my father said confidently. "She'll do anything you want her to." And I agreed to go. As we started to leave, I turned to Rutherford and said, "Okay, if I die, I'll sue you. I hope you have good insurance." "Oh, I guess I can't do that, so if I die, I'll come back and haunt you." Jesus fucking Christ. Rutherford looked like he couldn't believe what he was hearing, but nevertheless, he assured me that he was adequately insured. If I was in that position, I wouldn't be able to believe what I was hearing either. That's fucked up. It's just fucked up that you can make jokes like this while what's happened has happened, like, just recently. After what happened has just happened, you can make jokes like that, like, ugh. I got in the front seat of Rutherford's unmarked blue Chrysler sedan, and my father crawled in the back. Rutherford pulled out of the hospital parking lot and past my car, now sitting off to the side by itself. I glanced over at the vehicle and said to Rutherford, "I hope my car is okay. Does it have any bullet holes in it?" I don't think I need to say anything. Rutherford was dumbfounded, as he should have been. I'm sure his thought was that my 3 children had been shot, no one knew whether they'd live or die, and I seemed only to be concerned about whether my car might have a bullet in it. Yes! Yes! Him and any other rational, sane person with any amount of empathy or emotion or whatever. Yes, he was probably thinking that. That's what I'm thinking. And that's what everybody else would be thinking. I'm sure his thought was... Yeah. Rutherford couldn't know that this incessant patter, these endless jokes and flippant remarks were the only defense I had. Bullshit. Fuck you, Diane. Fuck you. Just fuck you. Fuck you for using fucking emotional abuse as an excuse to be this way when your kids have just been shot. To make excuses for yourself for putting your kids through this type of trauma that they're gonna have to deal with for the rest of their lives. Fuck you. Fuck you for using that as an excuse. I had no idea at the time how much emphasis would be placed on them later. Your car is okay, Rutherford said flatly. Good. As Rutherford drove back to the scene of the shootings to find some trace of the person who shot my 3 children, he was beginning to wonder if the suspect he was looking for was sitting right beside him. Agreed. And that would make perfect sense. Alright, this next section, Dr. John Mackey. Jesus. I'll read this section, I'm gonna have to stop because I just can't take much more of this right now. This is starting to just piss me off. Dr. John Mackey. Dr. John Mackey, emergency room physician at Mackenzie Wilmot Hospital, painstakingly stitched a patient's eye, unaware when he heard the piercing blare of a car horn that all hell was about to break loose. Mackey continued working until I burst through and shouted something about children being shot, and Mackey was out the door. In the driveway sat my little red sports car. Mackey sprinted over, glanced inside, saw 2 children in the back seat and blood everywhere. A nurse picked up Christy, and Mackey ran around to the driver's side for Danny. For the first time, Mackey noticed me standing by the car door. I was holding my left forearm and talking in an endless stream. He couldn't make out anything I was saying. Mackey carried Danny around the car, heading for the hospital door, and I suddenly cried, "Don't forget Cheryl!" Mackey glanced back and realized that there were 3 children in the car. Someone picked up Cheryl from the floor in front. Mackey ran into the hospital, and as he passed the receptionist's desk, he yelled to her to page another surgeon. Mackey raced for the trauma room with Danny, and I followed right behind. Doctors went to work immediately to stabilize Danny and my other 2 children, and it was 3 hours before Mackey was finally able to go back out to talk to me and try to put together what had happened. Mackey watched me carefully as I talked and later said he was amazed at how composed I was. As though I wasn't involved. Again, for the millionth time, I can 100%, in good faith, believe that is what happened. I fully believe that, and I would have the same reaction as Dr. Mackey. Wasn't related to the children who were at the very moment struggling for their lives. The doctors and nurses working on the children were shocked, stunned into disbelief that this could happen. Yet Mackey spoke to me and saw no tears, no emotion. I was calm, and to him that was odd. Yes, I'm sure it was. And again, to any other reasonable, rational, sane person with empathy, sympathy, emotions, the ability to grieve and feel bad for others, yes, that would seem weird to them as well. Mackey quickly examined my wounded arm and determined that it was not life-threatening. X-rays would later reveal severe damage, but right now Mackey could see an entry point on my forearm and 2 exit wounds close to it, indicating that the bullet went through only superficially. Mackey and a staff orthopedic surgeon agreed to administer antibiotics, stabilize my arm, and the following day core out the wound. Mackey described the planned treatment to me. "I have to go to work tomorrow." No, you don't understand," Mackey said slowly and deliberately so I wouldn't misunderstand him. "You're going to have surgery tomorrow." "Well, I've got to go to work the next day then." Mackey couldn't understand how anyone could be so cold and callous. My children were critically wounded, but he thought I was more concerned with when I could go back to work. Yeah. And that was also in the movie, too. Mackey had dealt with a lot of family members in emergency medical situations, he said later. But in all his years of experience, there had never been anyone like me. Self-assured, not a bit angry, I even smiled on occasion, Jesus fucking Christ, and chuckled once or twice. I was in very good control of myself, and that surprised him. Anyone else under the same circumstance would be a wreck. Yeah, understandably so. And that's Raven, by the way. Hey, sweetie. Um, anyone else under the same circumstance would, yes. But I was the calmest person there, and Mackie couldn't understand why. And neither would I. Alright. I'll read this one final section because it's about yet someone else. Then it goes back to Robin Rutherford, who was the detective. Alright. Shelby Day. Nurse Shelby Day helped bring the children in from the car, then replaced the makeshift splint they had applied to my arm. While Day worked, Sergeant Rutherford asked questions and challenged me to pinpoint the exact spot on the road where the shootings had taken place. It's a road not far from the Sunderman Road after the main road, I told him. That's not a very good description, Diane. There's a lot of other roads near Sunderman. I need to take you out there. The police don't know where to look if you don't show them. Rutherford put the pressure on me, implying that if the police couldn't find the man, I'd be to blame for not helping. Shelby Day said I had to be transferred to Sacred Heart Hospital in Eugene to treat my arm. We don't have the doctors to take care of it, and it could sever an artery if she moves it too much, she told Rutherford. Rutherford was insistent. I need her on the scene as soon as... Fine, interrupted Day tersely. Do whatever you want, but we won't be held responsible for anything that happens. I've told you what needs to be done. The entire argument between Rutherford and Day was academic because I had no intention of leaving the hospital and told them so. So you're not going to leave the hospital to potentially help your case out in the best way possible. You can't see how that might make you seem even more guilty. I'm not going anywhere until I find out how my kids are and know that they're okay. As if in answer, Day quietly kneeled in front of me and said softly, I just want you to know before you leave that the little boy is going to be okay, but one of the little girls might die. Day sobbed and her voice trailed off. She might be dead by the time you get back. So even the nurse, who doesn't even know who these... She knows who the kids are, but like, even she's showing way more emotional reaction than Diane did. Which one? I asked. Day shook her head to say she didn't know the girls from one another. Which table is she on? Day told me and I knew she was talking about Cheryl. I just said all right, and then Rutherford was back saying he needed to take me to the scene, that the police needed me to show them the exact spot. Returning to the scene was hell for me. I'm sure you loved the attention, though. I'm sure you did. I was afraid to go back and afraid to leave my children. Going back there meant having to relive the shootings, and I couldn't help feeling somehow responsible for putting my kids in jeopardy in the first place. Yeah. In my diary, I noted, drive out to scene, nervous and scared. What if he's still there? Oh, I bet you were nervous and scared, but I don't think you were nervous or scared that the guy would still be there. I think you were nervous and scared because you would get found out pretty quickly. He tried to kill me. Depression. Crossed Hayden Bridge. Kids and I used to go there all at night. That's where we should have gone tonight. Turned at Old Mohawk. Flashback on yellow car. Not there. Cops and cars and dogs. They were already there. They didn't need me. They risked my life for nothing. Bullshit. Yes, they needed you to describe the scene, where the scene was, so that there could be more detail. That's why they needed you. You're fucking pathetic. And I think I'm gonna stop there, but Jesus Christ. Like, you can just tell that it's all about her. You know, it's not about her kids or the fact that her kids are in danger, or that one of her kids has just died. It's all about her. All about her. She loves all the attention that she gets. She's an attention seeker. She's absolutely a narcissist. You know, she joking around while her kids are in critical condition and one of them has just died. Worrying about if her car has any bullet holes in it. And all the while she's trying to make this argument that the reason she's reacting this way is because of her upbringing. it's a bunch of bullshit to me. I think that those were her true, genuine emotional reactions. I do. I 100% believe they were true, genuine emotional reactions because she doesn't give a shit. She didn't give a shit because she was too worried about being with a guy who didn't want kids. A guy that she had an affair with who was married, and he didn't want kids. So she decided to take matters into her own hands and eliminate the one thing that kept her from being able to be with this person. That's what she did. And like I said, if there is a hell, if a heaven and a hell does exist, Diane deserves to be burning in one of the hottest parts of hell there is. So, that's it for part 2 of the reading of the book by Diane Downs, Best Kept Secrets. And I'll be back with you guys soon with more readings of the book as well as more content. And I'll go ahead and link all the stuff that I linked in the first part down below again. So, that's it for this one. Hope you guys have enjoyed this. Peace and have a good day. How do I get myself in these situations?